It was the day after I received my job offer. The job offer that would have made everyone proud. High-paying, prestigious, something people brag about at family reunions. I'd already told my parents I wasn't taking it. They didn't say much. No yelling, no dramatic fights. Just a tight-lipped dinner, forced smiles, and silence thick enough to suffocate. But I could feel the disappointment rolling off them like heat. The next day, I stopped by their house to pick up a few documents I needed for my project. Some business registration papers I'd left behind. I didn't plan on staying. I just walked in like I used to, quiet, casual, like I still belonged. That's when I heard them talking in the kitchen. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but once I heard my name, I couldn't move. Her startup is just child's play, my dad said. It won't go anywhere. I bet you $500 she'll be back begging for that job within 6 months. Then my mom, she's so ungrateful. That job could have changed our lives, and she gave it all up for a stupid startup. I couldn't breathe. I didn't even cry. I just stood there with this sharp, almost metallic feeling in my chest, like being stabbed with something blunt. I walked into the kitchen slowly. My face was hot, my hands shaking. I asked them, calmly, if that's really how they felt. If they really thought I was a joke. They didn't deny it. My dad shrugged and said I was being dramatic. You're making a huge mistake, he added. That job was security, for all of us. You're throwing your life away. And my mom, with a cold finality in her voice, said, you're being selfish. You're not a child anymore. Playing entrepreneur won't pay the bills. You're going to fail, and we won't be here to clean up after you. Those were her exact words. You're gonna fail. I didn't say anything back. I just nodded, turned around, and walked out of their house for what I thought might be the last time. My heart was in pieces, but my spine had never felt straighter. When I got home, I closed my bedroom door and stared at the ceiling. My heart felt like it was caught in a vice, squeezed by the weight of their words. I had imagined my parents might be upset, maybe disappointed, but I never expected their disbelief to cut so deep. For years, they had championed academic excellence and stable career paths. My rejection of that job offer, the one, was more than just a disagreement. To them it was betrayal. A child refusing the inheritance of security they had worked so hard to set up. That night I told myself I had 2 choices: crumble under their criticism or stand by what I believed in. If I wanted to make this startup a reality, it would have to be for the right reasons, not just to prove them wrong. Even so, I'd be lying if I said their lack of faith didn't bruise my spirit. Every success story I'd read always started with supportive families or mentors. I had neither. Just the sting of my parents' words echoing in my mind. My cheeks burned with anger, and my eyes stung with tears I refused to shed. But I refused to give up. The next few days felt like drifting in a storm without an anchor. I tried to focus on the basic tasks of setting up my company, organizing paperwork, finalizing the name, planning out the first round of pitches for potential clients. But my parents' bet echoed in my head. $500 on my failure. It was an odd detail, but somehow it hurt the most. They'd put an actual price on how quickly they believed I'd fall apart. Each time I second-guessed a decision, I pictured them rolling their eyes and placing fresh bets on how long until I'd give up entirely. Still, their skepticism lit a small fire in me. I didn't want to succeed to spite them. That motivation would be hollow. Instead, I wanted to succeed to remind myself that I was more than their doubts. My dream, an intuitive property management system that connected small landlords with reliable tenants, had once seemed like a niche idea, but I knew it had potential, especially in cities where renting was complicated and costly. I locked myself in my room, drafting a pitch deck and creating mock-ups for how the website might look. Slowly, I felt purpose rekindling. Without the cushion of parental support, everything I did seemed precarious. I burned through my meager savings faster than I'd anticipated. Server costs, legal fees, and everyday necessities piled up, and my bank balance plummeted. I tried to keep my head above water by taking on small consulting gigs, building websites for local businesses, editing marketing copy for acquaintances, but the tension was relentless. Each invoice I sent out felt like a lifeline, and every late payment threatened to unravel my fragile budget. Amid the chaos, doubt would slither in late at night, questioning if my parents had been right all along. Was I just playing at being an entrepreneur? It certainly didn't feel glamorous. My kitchen table doubled as my office, the corners buried under wires and coffee-stained notebooks. I'd find myself fantasizing about the steady paycheck I had turned down and the relief it would have brought. But then I'd remember the suffocating dread I felt when I imagined working for someone else's dream. That was the real motivator. If I gave up now, I'd always wonder what could have been. If my parents' words had truly broken me, or if I had broken myself by quitting. My parents, for their part, maintained a stony distance. No calls, no texts, and no visits. I would catch the occasional update through my cousins or overhear chatter at family gatherings, which I now mostly avoided. They'd say things like, "Your mom was asking about you," or "Your dad wanted to know if you'd reconsidered that job." But none of them reached out to me directly. It felt like walking on a tightrope over a chasm filled with their doubts. Each day I woke up, I braced myself for more subtle reminders of their disappointment. And each day, I reminded myself why I was still pushing forward. My business needed me to be strong, to trust my instincts, and to keep forging a path, even if it was strewn with obstacles. If I couldn't handle the pressure now, how would I handle larger challenges when the business started to grow? It was strangely liberating in a way to know I had no safety net. My parents had effectively forced me to rely on my own strength, so I fought to believe that was enough. I fought to trust that someday I'd prove my resilience to everyone, most importantly, to myself. My first real break came from an unexpected angle. A local landlord who owned a couple of modest properties in a rapidly developing neighborhood. I found his listing online, saw the negative reviews from disgruntled tenants, and realized there was a gaping hole in the market for a more streamlined landlord-tenant relationship. On a whim, I emailed him my pitch, a dashboard that would integrate rent collection, maintenance requests, and a communication channel all in one place. Much to my surprise, he wrote back, intrigued. We met for coffee and I showed him my half-finished prototype. His eyebrows shot up when he realized how easy the interface was. After a few follow-up meetings, he agreed to pilot my system for one of his apartment complexes. It wasn't much, maybe 24 units, but it was a start. Suddenly, the intangible concept I'd been clinging to became real. I dove into coding, refining, and testing, determined to make this a smashing success. Every day, I'd check in with him for feedback, squashing bugs and improving user flow. By the end of that first month, I had something tangible. A single, satisfied landlord who was happy to recommend me to his colleagues. That first pilot felt like a lifeline thrown into stormy waters. It wasn't just about the income, though it helped keep the lights on. It was about validation, about seeing my vision start to take shape in the real world. Landlords who tested the platform for a few weeks reported fewer administrative headaches, quicker repair turnarounds, and happier tenants. I watched my system transform from theoretical sketches in my notebook into a functioning tool that made life easier for people. It was exhilarating and humbling all at once. For so long, I'd heard echoes of "you're going to fail," but here was proof that I was moving in the right direction. Admittedly, it was still a small endeavor. I had no illusions about overnight success, but I had a product that worked, even if it was rudimentary. In the back of my mind, I wondered if my parents would be proud if they could see me working late into the night, hammering away at code and design, or if they'd scoff that I was clinging to a handful of modest clients. Either way, I didn't let the thought linger. I had a tiny foothold in the market, and that was enough. Word began to spread, slowly at first. A friend of my pilot landlord owned 2 properties across town and was tired of juggling spreadsheets and phone calls. He signed on too. Then a local real estate agent caught wind of what I was doing and reached out to see if she could integrate my dashboard into her client recommendations. Each small deal felt like stacking bricks in a wall that separated me from the memory of my parents' scorn. With each new client, I saw a glimmer of what this could become. There was a deep need for tech solutions in property management, especially for smaller landlords who couldn't afford fancy enterprise software. I realized I wasn't just building a business. I was filling a void in an industry that had long neglected the little guys. But every step forward also reminded me of the precariousness of my position. My budget was tight, and each new client required more resources, more server space, more time coding, more customer support. There were days I'd skip meals just to stretch my finances. Still, I relished the struggle. It felt like the price of independence, and I was more than willing to pay it. I maintained a regimented schedule to stay afloat. Mornings were reserved for emails, updates, and customer service calls. Afternoons for coding and system maintenance. Evenings for marketing, networking, and the freelance gigs that funded my dream. Sometimes I'd drift off to sleep with my laptop open, lines of code blurring together. I had no social life to speak of. My old college friends were climbing the ladders in corporate jobs, posting photos of happy hour get-togethers and weekend vacations. Meanwhile, I was at home debugging software until 2 in the morning. Yet despite the exhaustion, an undercurrent of hope kept me going. I was making tangible progress. The landlords I worked with were thrilled to find a simple solution to what they thought were insurmountable administrative headaches. Their emails of gratitude fueled me on nights I thought I might pass out from stress. And though it was lonely, there was a certain clarity in my life now. I was all in. No distractions, no illusions. Every atom of my being was dedicated to making this startup succeed, to forging the life I had chosen for myself, even if I was forging it in darkness, without the light of my parents' approval. One evening, as I was running through some new user interface designs, I received an email that changed the trajectory of my business. It was from a medium-sized property management firm that handled about 100 units scattered across the city. They'd heard of my service through a smaller landlord I'd helped, and they wanted a custom solution to streamline everything, from lease signings to insurance reminders. My heart jackhammered in my chest as I read through their requirements. This was the biggest opportunity I'd encountered so far. If I could pull it off, it would mean stability. It would mean being able to hire help, expand the platform's functionality, and finally see the potential I knew was there. But it also meant stepping into a new level of responsibility. At that moment, I felt torn. Part of me was thrilled at the challenge, while another part quaked with the worry that maybe this was too big for me to handle alone. My parents' voices still lingered in my memory, whispering that I was in over my head. But I decided to swallow my fear, respond professionally, and schedule a meeting. Little did I know, this would be the turning point I'd been praying for. Walking into that mid-rise office building for the initial consultation felt surreal. I wasn't just pitching to a solitary landlord in a coffee shop anymore. I was sitting across from a team of managers, each with their own set of demands and concerns. They quizzed me on my software's backend, security protocols, scalability, and user experience. For the first time, I felt the weight of a corporate environment, with its polished floors and steely-eyed administrators. Despite the intimidation, I presented every feature I had built, explaining how it could adapt to their ecosystem. I didn't sugarcoat my limitations. I was honest about the fact that I was a small operation, but I emphasized my agility, passion, and willingness to tailor solutions exactly to their needs. When the meeting ended, I left them with a demo login. My hands trembled as I walked out, a cocktail of hope and dread swirling in my veins. I remembered the moment I'd left my parents' house, hearing them say I'd fail. Now I was sitting in the kind of polished space they'd have worshipped. Yet I was here on my own terms. It was scary, but it was exactly where I wanted to be. A week passed before I got the call. It came in just after 5 p.m. when I was halfway through a freelance design project. The manager's voice was calm but firm. They had tested my demo extensively, and it fit their needs better than the generic software suites they'd been using. "We're in," she said simply. My heart soared so fast I felt dizzy. I asked a few professional-sounding questions, jotted down some notes, and thanked her. The moment I hung up, I let out a high-pitched squeal that must have startled my neighbors. This was it, the first major contract that would change everything. I scrambled to finalize paperwork, negotiate rates, and outline a project plan. My bank account would finally see a boost, giving me room to hire a junior developer or bring on part-time support. It felt like I'd been pushing a boulder uphill for ages, and now, suddenly, I was gaining momentum. For the first time, I took a breath and congratulated myself. Not gloating, but acknowledging that I'd made it here under my own steam. My parents had bet $500 against me, but now I had a contract worth far more than that on the table. Implementation was intense. I met with their IT department, hammered out the data migration plan, and spent countless hours ensuring the platform could handle their tenant influx. Those weeks blurred together in a haze of late nights and frantic problem-solving. Yet through the exhaustion, I felt a quiet confidence taking root. Day by day, the software stabilized. Every time they reported a successful lease signing or an automated rent reminder that went off without a hitch, my excitement grew. This was more than a pilot or a small-time deal. This was validation on a higher level. Companies with real budgets, real responsibilities, and real influence were trusting me to streamline their operations. I tried not to let it go to my head. I knew the tech world was fickle, and any mistake could cost me, but I also couldn't deny the warmth of accomplishment flooding my chest each time I saw the system humming along like a well-oiled machine. Behind the scenes, I was forging something bigger than I ever dared dream. A robust bus property management suite that could be scaled and potentially even pitched to investors. And through it all, I never heard a peep from my parents. Around this time, I started looking ahead, thinking about the next phase of growth. I needed a reliable team. I couldn't keep juggling front-end, back-end, customer support, and business development alone. A local developer who'd freelanced with me before was willing to come on board full-time, and so was a marketing specialist, fresh out of college. Hiring them meant dipping into my contract earnings, but I recognized it was the only way to scale. It felt risky, like stepping onto a shaky bridge, but the more I weighed my options, the clearer it became. If I wanted to make something truly remarkable, I needed to trust the strength of my product enough to invest in it. I set up a small office space in a co-working hub downtown. Still modest, but at least it wasn't my cluttered kitchen table. The day I signed that lease, I felt a surge of both fear and pride. I was building something real, something that could stand on its own legs. And maybe, if I could keep the momentum, I'd not only meet my parents' cold predictions with defiance, but surpass any vision they ever had for me. I was determined to prove I wasn't just chasing a fantasy. My phone buzzed one morning, jerking me awake from a rare, decent sleep. I squinted at the screen, saw an email header that made my heart skip. Congratulations, you've been named to Forbes 30 Under 30. At first, I assumed it was spam or a phishing attempt. I mean, me? Forbes? No way. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, opened the email, and read it 3 times to make sure it was real. A wave of indescribable shock and giddiness washed over me. This was the kind of recognition that startups dream of. The glossy magazine feature that validated a founder's grit and innovation. My mind flashed back to sleepless nights spent squashing code bugs, to my parents telling me I'd fail. I took a moment to let it sink in, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, though I fought them back. It wasn't the kind of thing I'd chased. Public recognition was never my main goal. But it felt like the universe tapping me on the shoulder and whispering, "You're on the right track." I put down my phone, staring at the cracked ceiling of my bedroom. In that quiet moment, I realized just how far I'd come without them. The Forbes announcement went live the following week. My inbox exploded with congratulatory messages from old classmates, ex-coworkers from my brief internship days, and random entrepreneurs who said they found my story inspiring. LinkedIn lit up with connection requests. Investors began poking around, curious about how my property management software could be scaled. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once. The exposure meant more potential clients, more scrutiny, and more pressure. For every congrats email, there was another request for a meeting or a pitch. Suddenly, my quiet hustle was under a very public spotlight. I remember standing in my new office, phone buzzing every few seconds, and feeling a dizzy mixture of pride and overwhelm. My small team was ecstatic, taking turns reading the article out loud and cheering every time my name appeared. I tried to let myself bask in the achievement, to acknowledge that I had indeed created something special. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't help thinking about my parents, wondering if they'd heard, if they'd seen the write-up, if the daughter they'd once called selfish was now a source of pride or just an inconvenient reminder of their own disbelief. I didn't have to wonder for long. On the day the Forbes piece went viral in my circles, I got a phone call from my mom. Then my dad. Then my uncle. The calls I'd yearned for in the early days of my struggle now came like a flood, each one dripping with sugary praise and a sudden, convenient amnesia about how they'd bet against me. My mom's text said, "We always knew you had it in you." My dad left a voicemail about how proud he was, insisting their tough love had been a form of motivation. Listening to him try to rewrite the past, to paint it as some kind of grand plan, left me with a twisted feeling in my chest. I realized that the people who had once been silent when I needed them most now clamored to be part of my victory. A part of me felt an immature urge to lash out, to remind them of their harsh words and bets. But another part just felt numb. This was the moment I had once dreamed of, the moment when my parents would see my worth. Yet standing in that spotlight now, all I felt was quiet, unresolved hurt. Amid the slew of congratulatory calls, one particular voicemail from my dad stood out. "See? We were only trying to push you to your full potential." I played it twice, my jaw clenching at the casual rewrite of history. I thought back to the night I overheard him in the kitchen, placing a literal wager on my failure. My mom's words had been even sharper. "You're going to fail." They hadn't felt like love or guidance, or even tough parenting. They'd felt like condemnation. And yet here they were, acting as if this were all part of some grand scheme to encourage me. I tried to recall the hollow ache of that night, how it nearly sank me, how I had to dig deep to keep going. Now, with my name splashed across a major publication, they wanted to bask in the glow of my success. The collision of those two realities, past and present, sparked a quiet fury in me. I didn't want a big showdown. I was beyond that, but I knew I had to set boundaries. If my parents thought they could just walk back into my life with open arms and hearts, well, they had another thing coming. In the midst of my emotional whirlwind, business continued to boom. The Forbes feature brought a wave of media interest, and I found myself juggling interview requests alongside a surge of new client signups. My team and I had to figure out how to scale fast without compromising the personalized service that had set us apart. We discussed opening a second office, possibly in another major city, and started to explore funding options with eager venture capitalists. For a moment, it felt surreal, like I was starring in a movie about a scrappy entrepreneur hitting the big time. Yet, every night when I shut down my laptop and let the adrenaline subside, I couldn't help revisiting my parents' sudden about-face. Friends told me I should celebrate, that this was my time. But a part of me was stuck in the bitterness of their betrayal. Their silence had been deafening when I was at my lowest, and their voices were overwhelming now that I was at my peak. Conflicted, I debated whether to cut them off for good or try to salvage some semblance of a relationship. At times, it felt like the choice between self-respect and family ties. I had dinner with my uncle and aunt, who congratulated me in person. They seemed genuinely happy, but I caught a flicker of discomfort whenever my parents were mentioned. Eventually, my uncle cleared his throat and said, "You know, they really are proud, even if they don't show it right." My aunt nodded, offering, "They just have a tough way of expressing themselves." I sighed, remembering the harsh words I'd overheard. I appreciated their attempt at reconciliation, but I couldn't shake the memory of how vicious my parents had been. My aunt encouraged me to invite Mom and Dad for a celebratory dinner, to clear the air. The thought made my stomach twist. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face them as a successful entrepreneur, because somewhere deep inside, the child in me still hurt from their dismissal. After the meal, I walked home under the city lights, grappling with how to handle the fracture in my family. Part of me wanted to just bury the resentment and move on. Another part insisted that ignoring what happened would only breed more bitterness. Success had amplified every emotion I felt, and now the path to healing seemed as daunting as building the startup itself. Life threw another curveball when a TV news crew requested an on-site interview at my new office. They wanted a slice-of-life segment featuring local tech prodigies making waves. I stood by the tall windows, city skyline behind me, answering questions about how I got started, what fueled my ambition, and where I saw the company going. Inevitably, they asked about my family's reaction. My chest tightened at the question. A montage of painful memories flooded my mind. The hush of that dinner table when I declined the job offer, the echo of "you're going to fail," the sting of a silent phone on my birthday. But this was live TV, so I kept my composure. I said, they were worried, like any parents would be. But in the end, it all worked out. A neutral, polite response. After the crew left, I felt a pang of sorrow. I had to lie by omission, covering up the torment I'd gone through. It occurred to me then that maybe my drive to succeed had always been anchored in proving to myself that my parents' words weren't the final verdict. Yet I also realized that letting them define me, even negatively, gave them far too much power. Around that time, my company hit a milestone, a valuation crossing $40 million. The official paperwork from potential investors confirmed it. My cheeks flushed with pride, and I found myself grinning at the zeros in front of me. 40 million. It felt like a fairy tale figure. My team celebrated with a low-key party in the office, popping sparkling cider and toasting to our collective efforts. For a moment, the sweetness of success enveloped me. We'd come so far, from a single pilot to a multi-city operation. Landlords raved about the system, and tenants found it easier to communicate their needs. This was the dream I'd nurtured during those lonely nights. Yet, when I stepped outside onto the balcony for a breather, my mind drifted back to my parents. They had missed all these little victories, all these struggles and triumphs, and now that I was making it, they wanted to be front and center. The contrast was stark. My small, devoted team who'd been in the trenches with me versus the parents who'd condemned my endeavor as childish. The question now was whether there was any space for them in the future I was building, or if that door had closed for good. I decided to meet with my parents for coffee, one-on-one, to see if there was any way to reconcile. I chose a tiny cafe near my office, the perfect neutral ground. When they walked in, my chest tightened. They looked smaller than I remembered, perhaps weighed down by guilt or uncertainty. We exchanged stiff greetings and sat at a corner table. They tried to dive into congratulations. "We're so proud. We told everyone about your Forbes feature. We knew you'd do well." I let them speak before calmly telling them I remembered every harsh word, every silent month. I spoke of how their dismissals had cut me deeply, how it wasn't tough love, but genuine abandonment at the moment I needed a kind word. My dad's mouth twitched as he tried to defend himself, but my mom put a hand on his arm, eyes glossy with tears. She admitted that they'd been scared of me risking everything, scared of losing control over my future. Their fear had morphed into criticism. For the first time, it felt like I was finally being heard. I didn't need them to grovel. I just needed them to acknowledge the truth. And they did, haltingly but honestly. We didn't end with a grand group hug or a perfect family snapshot, but we ended with a fragile understanding. They knew my success wasn't theirs to claim, and I knew they were human, flawed, fearful, and capable of growth. As I walked away from that cafe, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not the fiery triumph I'd expected all those years I toiled in silence. Ultimately, this journey had been about proving to myself that I wasn't the failure my parents saw when they looked at me. I had built a thriving company that solved real problems, and I had discovered a well of resilience I never knew I had. Maybe my parents would never fully grasp the depth of what I went through. Maybe they would keep rewriting the past to fit their narrative. But that was okay. Because I knew the truth of every late-night struggle, every tear of frustration, every moment of quiet resolve when no one believed in me. And that truth was mine to keep, a testament to who I had become. In the end, I didn't need their permission or their validation. I had my own, and that was enough.